a very fun question, fun discussion topic today. This is Allie, Forrester. This is me, Anton Chuvakin from Google Cloud. And of course, you are all here. You woke up so early to hear about AI SOC and AI in a SOC. We'll just start. We'll have a running start, I think. And I think we'll start with a very obvious question. What is this whole thing? How do you define AI SOC or maybe agentic SOC or anything in that area? Like, what's your impression?
Yeah, it's a surprisingly difficult question because everything seems to be agentic SOC or AI SOC right now. Certainly if you were at RSA, you saw that. When we at Forrester think about an AI SOC or an agentic SOC, a lot of it comes back to how you're using AI in a comprehensive way. Like when we think about what the future of the SOC looks like, it is augmented with AI, with people still in that process. But AI is doing things like managing triage, managing investigation, in some cases doing some aspects of response. It is this system of AI agents that are working together effectively to achieve the outcome of detection and response faster and better. And it opens up a lot of possibilities. There are a lot of challenges to getting there, which we're going to talk about quite a bit. But a lot of the value add of this future is that we're going to be able to detect and respond to things faster. We're going to have better detection coverage. And we're ultimately going to have a continuous process of improvement, which I've talked a lot about in the context of detection engineering. But a lot of that work has historically been quite manual. So this is going to take it to the point where we can actually start automating it more effectively with AI. But what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, actually, my usual trigger point on this is that I feel better if we talk about AI in a SOC. Like I have a SOC and I had AI and some things improve and we'll talk about the metrics. And AI SOC was a little bit triggering for me because people assume that if I just buy one of the tools from AI SOC vendors, I have a SOC. And that's why I was so a little bit triggered by this. But I think that the conversation today is about broad uses of AI and AI agents specifically in a SOC, whether it's a classic, as I call it, 1990s style SOC or a modern SOC built on more engineering principles. To me, this is still how do we apply AI in the context of a SOC.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very important distinction here. We are not talking about the AI SOC vendor platforms that you see in the market today, because in reality, those are solving one very specific small part of the problem. They are not solving it comprehensively. They are not capable of doing that. In reality, it is a combination of people, process, and technology. And the technology as it is today is not going to get you there. It is at least, well, I mean, nobody likes to do timelines right now, but at least a couple of years away from actually succeeding in this type of AI SOC capability that is comprehensive.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned technology, of course, the whole stack. And yesterday in a fun conversation, the topic of SOAR came up. And I feel like there's some kind of unhealthy, uneasy relationship between the previous wave of, hey, let's automate SOC by buying a SOAR, and the current wave of automation of, hey, automate SOC by adding AI or adding agents. How do you think about the relationship between SOAR and AI in a SOC or AI SOC?
Yeah, it's a great question because what we're currently seeing is there are 5 different ways that you can approach getting to an AI agent or agentic system within security operations, right? There's on the far end of the spectrum where you as the user are not involved at all. If you're using like a service provider, like an MDR provider, they're going to be using AI. They're going to be using AI agents. Many of them are already. Some of them are using them very effectively. Others not so much. But that's kind of the far end of the spectrum. From there, you can do like the AI SOC platforms, which are, as we mentioned, going to get you a piece of this, but not really all of that capability. There's AI built into every single security tool in existence right now, and every single tool in existence right now, whether we like it or not. And that's kind of the middle ground between this. But then you get into the option of using SOAR and building your own agents through SOAR. And it's kind of like a low-code, no-code way to approach AI agent creation and management and customization. And there are positives and negatives to this. The main issue and the main challenge that I see with this approach is, first off, if you're using SOAR to orchestrate multiple agents together, it's not an agentic system, right? It is on the path to an agentic system, but it is not there, because to have a true agentic system, the agents need to be interacting with one another on a continuous basis and communicating with one another so they can go back and forth and make better decisions over time. You're not going to get that with a static workflow. But it is a good bridge between where ideally you were before, which is a lot of more static automation playbooks, and this agentic future where you start to introduce AI agents into those static playbooks until they can ultimately take over. So it's kind of a middle ground. Now, the caveat here is that it requires you as the user to put in a lot of upfront work to make sure that the AI agents that you're creating are high quality, are tested, and are validated. And to be honest, at least from what we've seen so far, a lot of the testing and validation harnesses that are built into a lot of the SOAR tools do not enable you to do that effectively. And so there's going to be a gap here where you're not going to see the highest quality results with this process because it's just not realistic with the testing and validation capabilities you have.
Yep.
The last piece of this is there's one more option, because I mentioned 5, I've only said 4 so far, and that is just building it yourself and actually doing all the work to build it yourself from the ground up, to build your own AI agents, not using SOAR, not using anything. I don't recommend it,
Yeah,
but
we'll
it's
get
an option.
to it. Yeah, we kind of have some choice words to say about this approach from most people, but also with exceptions, right? I mean, oddly enough, this whole SOAR point started with somebody bringing up an argument a few times yesterday by saying that that's not an agent, that's a script with LLM in the middle. And I thought, oh, wait a second, it uses LLM to make decisions, kind of maybe an agent. And the person said, yeah, but it's a trivial, oversimplified case of an agent. It doesn't make decisions, it doesn't plan, it doesn't have memory, it just have a non-deterministic step in a deterministic process. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. And I think what you pointed out is kind of reminds me of that analogy.
And I do think that that's like one of the issues that we have right now with the distinction between like what is an agent and what isn't it. If you look at like a lot of the tools on the market today even, there are differences in the implementation capabilities and in the architecture decisions that have been made. And at the architecture level, it's a factor of, is this even something that would qualify as an agent, or is it just a skin thrown over ChatGPT that you're able to ask questions to? That's not an agent. Like, we've had AI agents for a lot longer than people think about them. I made my first agent in 2012. And the reality with AI agents is that what matters about them is the encapsulation you have, the focus you have, the fact that it focuses on one particular or a couple particular inputs and comes with a particular output. And without that, you're not really dealing with an AI agent. So to your point, if you just have like a SOAR playbook and you send a prompt out to an LLM, that's not having an AI agent. That's just having a invocation of an LLM.
Yeah, in the middle. Yeah. So you obviously, as part of your job, you judge a lot of vendors, some possibly harshly.
Judge is a strong word.
No, I'm not bringing up the the Terminator movie. Like you, but the point is that you kind of have to decide whether this technology is real today, whether it's maybe too much promise for now. So if somebody asks you about like what's the state of the art, like what's real today versus what's possibly aspirational today, but is likely to be real tomorrow. How do you think about this? This is probably useful for the whole audience, you'd see vendors as well, and you'd have to say what they're saying kind of makes sense, but will it really happen? So what's your approach to this type of deciding between reality and, fantasy?
So it's a great question because it does differ quite a bit depending on the vendor that you talk to, depending on the user that you talk to and their capabilities. I'd say that when it comes to a lot of the products in the market today, it's kind of basic stuff that we're seeing, right? There's obviously like the chatbot use case, which is rampant. There's turning everything in the world into text, which is in some cases very useful. In others, it's like most people don't read books anymore. So, and I say that as someone who just released a book. So but the chatbot use case, there's the text use case, which can be useful. Query language translation is a core use case. The more interesting ones are the AI agents, where we get into things like triage and investigation. There are others into like threat hunting. To be honest, the biggest gains that we're going to see are the ones that are focused on triage and investigation, because those are the hardest things that we have to do in security operations. Now, depending on the vendor that you talk to, you're going to get very different capabilities here, because it depends a lot on the way that they approach testing and validation, the way they approach quality, and how they're going to manage the implementation of that as well. And so right now, I'd say triage is useful, but it's not saving an insane amount of time. If you talk to some MDR vendors, they're able to achieve like really significant gains with their AI agents that are focused on investigation, because they're doing a lot of the investigation with those agents. It comes with trade-offs and costs, of course, but that to me is where a lot of the future is, because it is the most time-consuming in the incident response process. But what do you see?
I mean, you mentioned gains, significant gains, minimal gains, but that implies that there's a way to judge gains, to assess gains. And so I'm going to use my podcast co-host co-host's favorite question, what gets better at client SOCs when they add AI? I mean, my attempts to get it out of vendors at last year's RSA 2025 led me to a lot of blank stares and people saying, Anton, but it has AI, obviously it's better. And unfortunately, that was the state of the art maybe last year, and I feel like things are getting better, and there are measurements, there are some metrics, but you studied SOC metrics a lot, and your Forrester document on this is kind of one of the authoritative sources, at least in my mind, because it's simple, by the way.
Thank you.
Not only because of profound thoughts. But what metrics reflect that, hey, here's my SOC, here's AI, I added, I cranked the handle, and something got better. Like, where does it show up in metrics?
Yes, so most of the metrics that I see are really focused around like mean time to remediate, which is fine.
To remediate specifically?
Yes. Which is fine, but to be honest, it's a very broad metric. It is very difficult to put that in a box of like, is that actually valuable? And a lot of times, it's mean time to remediate across any type of input, any type of detection, which is just not really useful, right? One of the things that we talk about in SOC metrics and the research that we've done there quite a bit is the fact that like, if you take a random metric like mean time to respond, mean time to investigate, mean time to detect, in isolation, it's meaningless. Like, it doesn't actually matter. Saying that it's 5 minutes or 1 minute or 6 hours doesn't make a difference because you don't have any other context about the situation. So for example, say that you have mean time to detect and it takes 6 hours. Seems like a bad number until you juxtapose it against something like the false positive rate. If the false positive rate is very low, but it takes 6 hours to do a detection, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, because say you lower that down to 5 minutes or 1 minute, but the false positive rate skyrockets, that's even worse, because then your team is stuck dealing with a bunch of alerts that they don't want to. And so when I look at a lot of the metrics that we're seeing around the AI agents, I try to focus on getting very specific guidance out of the teams that I'm talking to of saying, okay, how is this improving mean time to investigate in a meaningful way? And is it giving an accurate and quality output? Is this something where someone can take that, pick it up, and actually reach a conclusion that is valuable? Or is it just giving them a bunch of stuff that they have to sift through and it's not actually providing a ton of value? So juxtaposing those metrics is really important. And I do think that things like mean time to remediate, mean time to respond, mean time to investigate remain very important, but it has to be specific to the detection surface that you're talking about, whether that's email or endpoint or identity, and it has to be specific to the context around it and what it means for the analyst. Yeah. What do you see?
I feel like I want to gently push back on this because everything you've done, everything you've described so far has to do with time. It looks like it's, if I put an umbrella over that bucket, it would be time saved.
Yes.
All time, it's a little bit effectiveness for detection indirectly, because if you detect faster, supposedly it's better, except for the caveats you mentioned. But it's all about time. What about anything else that improves? What about coverage? What about quality, however it's defined? What about anything else? Like, this is like all time saved. And
yes. So it's time and analyst experience. Like, that juxtaposition is what's important. So it's not solely time. It is also like, is it actually improving the quality of the analyst experience or not? And if it isn't, then it's not worth it to be doing. The reason that I am fixated on time is because to me, it's one of the lowest hanging fruit for AI agents that we have. And so to your point, detection coverage, it would be really great if we could start using AI there effectively. Yeah. I think that it is a longer term stretch goal. And when I talk to a lot of the security teams that I work with, a lot of times it does come back to, okay, but how can we use this for detection coverage? How can we use this for response? How can we use this for like figuring out what data we need to be bringing into the SOC versus not? And those are great questions, and we do want to address them. But at the end of the day, we need to be showing significant value with AI now so we can continue to get investment later into these more niche things. It's much easier to show to your CFO or your CTO or your CEO and say, hey, this saved our team X amount of man hours that we wouldn't have had otherwise, as opposed to trying to communicate to them, oh, we can detect stuff real good now. Like, yeah, it's a much more difficult question.
And it becomes kind of hand-wavy. Yeah. It's less about what I think about this one, but they also mentioned analyst experience. And it sounds like there's a bit of a improved, like, people just feel better, they do better, they are more happy about their jobs. I mean, if I don't have to be like a human, swivel chair, look up 5 things, if a machine does it, like, there's some kind of people are better, doing their job better, they're more happy. Is there anything to that side? Like, AI makes your otherwise miserable SOC experience better?
It can. It can make it worse, too.
Oh.
which I think is the problem. Like I mean, I think everybody in their own way is dealing with AI slop at this point, at work and outside of work. And if it is a tool that is just producing paragraphs and paragraphs of text that your team has to read on a regular basis to figure out what's going on, that's not useful. That's not helping them. Most people don't want to spend their time doing that. That's why user experience exists. That's why we use colors and images and graphics. Like, don't take away my widgets. But it can be really useful if it's done well, to your point, because the whole idea of like the swivel chair, multiple consoles, having to pull data from multiple sources, we've had these issues for so long, and everything has claimed that it's fixing them, but we haven't seen that, except now in very specific scenarios where the AI agents are able to pull that information really effectively. And so depending on the tool that you're using and how effective it is at doing that, it can really improve the analyst experience because it lets them focus on more important things. Which could be building new detections. It could be more focus on deeper investigations that require significantly more work and are more interesting, quite frankly. It could be focusing on threat hunting or detection coverage. Yep. So I really hate to give the answer of it heavily depends on what tool you're using, but at the end of the day, right now especially, it does.
It would, I mean, the theme would come up further in our session when we would talk about money savings, right? Because we definitely saw examples where money was saved, and we certainly saw examples where money were wasted. So, but before we go there, I just want to touch the readiness subject. Maybe it's, again, my ex-analyst obsession with, like, are you ready for certain technology? But the question of, like, is your SOC ready for AI, ready to gain the improvements we just discussed? There is some sort of criteria. So in your mind, what does it mean to assess whether the SOC is ready for AI? Again, I've in my past, I've seen people who want to hunt, but they don't log. And do all sorts of other bizarre maturity violations, so to say, when they don't do 1, 2, and 3, but they want to do step 17. So is there something of that sort for AI, like how to look at a team that does DNR or SOC and say, oh, you guys would be, the metrics you just mentioned would get better if you had AI, and you look at other team and say, oh, well, no, you should just get data in first and then do AI. Like, how do you think about that? I haven't my answer as well, so feel free to toss it back afterwards, but I'm just curious about yours.
So the first and most important thing is you need to have someone on the team that actually wants to use this, which sounds...
wants to use it? What about the big boss makes him?
That's the biggest problem. It's like, it especially needs to be someone senior who has been skeptical about AI. If you can get that person to start using AI and to start seeing value out of it, then you're going to have a much easier time getting the rest of the team to adopt.
That's not what I expected at all.
It's so difficult to actually get people to want to use this, despite what we all think. And so, especially if that person can ideally communicate to the team well and serves as kind of like a mentor to the rest of the team, that's going to open things up much faster for you. The second thing is, unfortunately, I hate to say this because I've been saying this for years, but you really need to understand what your processes are when it comes to doing detection and response. Like, how do you respond to certain incidents? Do you have that written out? Do you have that encoded in a run book? Which I know a lot of people, at least that I talk to, I'm curious if this is the case for you too, have said like, oh, thank God we don't have to actually do that encode our run books anymore because now AI is going to take care of that. But the reality is that the most important thing that you guys need to do to prepare the AI agents that you're working with is give it the contextualization of the business context. You cannot do that if you don't have your specific processes encoded so that it can take that in, typically through RAG, and have an understanding of like, what should it do and why. So that's the second thing. The third thing is data, and actually giving it access to the data that it needs and having it have access to that data, ideally in a limited number of locations, hopefully one if possible.
Yeah, we'll get to that. That one just comes up a lot as a odd argument, but
very difficult. But the data and getting access to that data and having the data for the business context is incredibly important in this as well. And then the last thing that I would highlight here is we've talked a little bit about so far, like the big boss coming down and saying use AI wherever you can. But the reality is that even if the big boss is coming down and doing that, we're seeing that a lot of teams are having internal audit come to them and be like, so tell us, what are your efficiency gains with this? How many people are you replacing? What are you doing with it? And they're like, well, the boss told us to use it, so we're using it. And we're like, that's not good enough for our team. So you have to actually show us quantifiable gains from this. And so One of the reasons I harped on the time saved so much earlier with the investigative agent is because you need to be focusing on and choosing tasks that are going to show immediate value and show high value. So focus on low-hanging fruit that is going to be lowest risk, highest value. Investigation to me is one of those. But what do you think? What do you see?
Before I kind of give my part of the answer, you mentioned business context and a few other things. And as I observed in some of the maybe low to mid-maturity SOCs, a lot of this is in people's heads, and it's kind of fully in the tribal knowledge territory. So, this is honestly, I'm going to ask you the question I honestly absolutely do not know the answer to. So, for sometimes, well, what kind of advice would you give a team when you tell them what you just told everybody about the business context, about the processes, about the workflows, and then you say to succeed with AI, you need to have all that, and they nod, and then they say, but hey, John knows this part, and Joanna knows this part, and I think somebody else knows this other part, but it's not written anywhere, it's not in any kind of digital system. How do we, well, quote unquote, give it to AI if we don't have it in a machine-readable format? Like, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would tell them, I'm sorry, but you're going to spend a lot of time doing documentation. Like, you're going to be writing a lot of stuff.
It's not unexpected.
Like, it's unfortunately like the simplest answer is the right one here. You need to have this written down. You need to have it standardized, the processes that you want AI to follow, standardized in some format, and able to be taken in through RAG or through whatever context the vendor you're using provides, or through other options. A good example of this that I've run into is I've talked to a team that has developed AI agents themselves. Yep. Very cool that they're doing this. They're doing it from scratch. They're up in there with Claude Code, making their own agents, having them run from an investigative standpoint, and they basically entirely replaced their investigative function in security operations with these agents doing this, saving them a lot of time. Not something that most teams are going to be able to accomplish. This is a very engineering-forward team. Yep. This is a team that is entirely cloud-native and is very focused on just how can we get to the most efficient, right answer fastest, and has a lot of funding behind them. Yep. Now, it's really cool that they're able to do this, but the only reason that they're able to do this so well is because with every AI agent that they've built, it is custom tailored to their environment, to their processes, to everything that they've established over the many years that they've tracked all of the data around their processes internally. And so if you want AI that is going to give you bad outputs, that is going to give you information that is not quite right, feel free to not write out your processes, feel free to not document, feel free to just try to jump in and use it. But if you want it to give you the right outputs to help your team speed up, you need to have this basis.
Okay. And so you kind of pointed back at me with the question. So I kind of said that I had this little framework of elements that how I would assess the readiness, and now I'm slightly embarrassed that I did not have the person willing to actually do it. I sort of assumed it, and but maybe I'll write it in with a human element, kind of like ready for it, for example. But I do start with data foundations, and it's kind of a broad bucket of like, can machines actually get the data? Because I think one of the articles somebody wrote about AI elsewhere in security basically said, if your humans cannot get the asset informations about what you have in a company, your machines would never will. I mean, if humans can't get it, machines won't. So this type of data, machine-readable, machine-accessible, available data is, to me, the first bucket. And then, of course, the degree of process maturity, just like you described. Process has to be, well, on paper, on slides, documents. It has to be explicitly there. It can't be like all ad hoc, all we'll figure out what to do, we'll decide, we'll ask John, he knows, or he knows who to ask. Like, that would be a lot of constraints, and then the kind of the human element, I guess, with the willingness to do it. And I think you didn't mention the actual modern stack where the data is, like modern SIEM, modern whatever else. To me, this is a criteria, because if you have to make agents work with the late 90s SIEM product that has APIs for 3 out of 300 capabilities they have, it would be really difficult. Yeah, I mean, I've seen people screen scrape terminals using AI agents. It's really amazing. But it makes me think that maybe, don't. Yeah, like that was literally the way to get some data, by screen scraping the terminal window with AI. And I'm like, no, please, like that, do something with it.
It's creative.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that to me the measurement, because you'll have to report to quote unquote the big boss that things are better now with AI. That means that you have to have a degree of SOC metrics instrumented. And this is, yes. You may look at me and say, well, of course we have SOC metrics, we have at least this. Actually, have you seen SOCs that actually don't explicitly state we have metrics? Yeah, probably you have. Yeah, exactly. Everywhere. So it's hard for me to imagine them saying, oh, there's clear evidence of AI improving things if things are not measured.
It's a very good point.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a very good one. Because it's like having the metrics, but also having the instrumentation to actually collect the metrics is a whole different ballgame, which is where so many teams really struggle.
So I want to bring up the possibly fun and somewhat triggering question about DIY, and you, of course, brought up a beautiful example of somebody succeeding. Of course, our company, which is Google, has a lot of great examples. We did a RSA Prezzo about some of the lessons about how it worked out, and so I am well aware of the fact that you can DIY it and be quite okay. But how do you advise clients? Like, do you usually tell them, to actually build it from scratch, you need to have like engineering culture, willingness to build things, willingness to maintain things over time. What are other ideas if somebody here in row 37 thinks, I don't need to pay money to a vendor, I'll just whip it up, I can vibe code it, I have a developer. Sorry, I don't know where this one is going to, and we can just do it ourselves cheaper. Like, what's your typical reaction to this?
Yes, I think you said the word, which is maintain, right?
Maintain.
It is easy to just vibe code something and call it a day. I mean, we've seen the markets react so significantly to this idea that people are just going to vibe code Salesforce and be done with it. But the reality is the maintenance is the problem. The maintenance and the willingness to maintain it and the actual resources and skill to maintain it, because it's all fine and good to have that one developer that is like, hey, I can vibe code this, no problem. I mean, we've seen this with the data pipeline management market as well, where it's like, sure, we can set this up so that we're able to intake data into the SIM and route it wherever we want to, but then that one person leaves, and the team is like, I have no idea what all this Python is, and now I have to go and figure it out, read through what likely does not have many code comments, and try to figure it out and then maintain it myself. It's a ton of work.
Yep.
And so if you have a team that is built as an engineering function, this can work and it can be really great, especially if you want to be on the bleeding edge of this stuff. And that's really cool, and I would love to talk to you. But for the vast majority of teams, it's very difficult to maintain that over time. And so I would caution that that's actually a big risk to your organization, because there's going to come a time when that person leaves, and when that person leaves, you're not going to have the team that you need to maintain the capability that you built. And I mean, if you want to go and build your own AI SOC, then maybe you should just start an AI SOC company at that point.
Yeah, I mean, my many bosses ago, when this topic came up, the boss would basically say, oh, you're doing this project, does it pass a bus test? And of course, the bus test was if the key developer is hit by a bus, do you still have a project? And this is very but this is stuck in my head for 10 plus years at this point, and this is people now think that times have changed because we have AI, and you can have whatever the coding agent look at the code and decide what to do, and I feel like things have shifted, but to most teams things haven't shifted enough. So this is you see the direction of movement, and you think, oh wow, look, things are not what they were in 2010s when we had DIY, Hadoop SIM failures all over the place, and now things have changed, but to me they didn't change enough.
Yes, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I will say my background is as a computer engineer. That was what I did before becoming a hacker, and when people started vibe coding things, that was my nightmare, because I had seen tech in the 2010s and how there were so many founders that were like, oh, if I could only create this, if I only knew how to code, I would be able to create the prototype for this, and now that's happening. And I have so many friends who are getting code thrown at them that is the worst code they've ever seen written, no code comments, just atrocious, never gonna fit in with the rest of the code base kind of thing. Yeah. So please be careful with how you're choosing to approach this. If you're like, oh, I can vibe code this in a day, it's no problem. The reality is someone's gonna have to deal with the output of that eventually, and I'm begging you to please not make it be a developer.
I mean, they would make interesting case studies about what not to do, but apart from that, which brings us to another possibly fun point about, can AI in a SOC really be, in theory, slower and more expensive than humans? And I think the story that I have related to some people is when we were coming to RSA to do a presentation about how Google approaches this, we saw a big bus. No, not that type of bus, but the bus had a sign that says, we'll do it at AI speed. And both me and my co-presenter basically looked at the bus and said, whoa, at AI speed, that's slow compared to matching rules. And clearly the vendor meant slow faster than humans, with humans doing it manually, but it is obviously much slower and much more expensive than matching signatures. And the point wasn't that we should replace AI with signatures. The point was that if you had a chance to use traditional detection, straightforward text matching, and have a decent chance of success, of course, you'd have a much lower cost and much faster speed. In reality, you can't pattern match your way to success, so you will use AI and everything will be fine, but it isn't a default choice for some examples. And have you seen any situations when people, for example, tried throwing a terabyte of logs at an LLM and then being surprised at the token costs or anything of that sort? Like, there are interesting stories, especially maybe in DIY land too.
Yes, I mean, it's kind of funny that that's the advertisement that whatever company chose, because I see so many of those videos on Instagram where it's like people making fun of LLMs and pretending like, oh, if your coworker was an LLM, and they pause and wait to answer the question, and they're like, great question, great idea, and they pause again. And so there are time constraints that take place when you're using AI. Now, the thing that I will say, kind of going back to an earlier part of our conversation, is once you get that person who is more advanced on your team on board with using AI, they're going to want to have a lot of tokens, and they're going to be spending a lot of money because they're going to be experimenting a lot with this. I've seen this time and time again where someone will be converted from a skeptic into someone who's really excited about AI. They're spending all weekend and all night working on it, and they run through tokens like nobody's business. And so it can be much more expensive, especially right now in this experiment phase that we're in, than what you were doing before, and that's kind of the point of innovation and the innovation life cycle. It also can take more time because the answer is not always right. I mean, this is an early example that thankfully I have not seen recently, but to give you one example of a time where AI was giving the wrong answer and it was taking more time for people than it was actually aiding them, I have seen instances where there's an alert that comes up and the vendor is like, oh, look at this, it gives you all the response recommendations you could want for this particular alert. And I'm like, cool, let's read through them. And the first one is, if you want to stop this from ever happening again, just block Excel across the enterprise.
Oh, it was the machine really did suggest that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I heard of that.
Now, is that a right answer? Maybe, but it is not the right answer for any organization, is the reality. And so that's not going to save you time. That's the reality, is there are certain things that AI is going to respond that are not going to save you time. There are certain ways where it's going to be implemented and it's going to save you a ton of time. But there's a balance to that, and it has to do with the way that it's implemented, the quality of the output, and how you're able to actually translate that output into action. And so evaluating that becomes really important. But what's your perspective?
Yeah, I feel like that one to me is interesting because recommendations, when machines make recommendations, we also did another sweep of the RSA asking the very demo quality products, which demoed really well, to produce recommendations. And occasionally they did have subtle, there was one example was a list of recommendations was correct, but it assumed that a certain entity exists in your registry. And if this entity does not exist, if it doesn't exist, it runs, but if it does exist, it crashes right away because you need to say, remove the previous instance and then run the recoms. And it was like, okay, so these are correct. If you don't have it, if you do have it, it would crash. And it was like, oh, okay, so LLM is not wrong, but it's also not right.
Yeah.
I mean, this brings up the question of trust. And I feel like it's almost like the T word. We can't not say it in the discussion of AI SOC, because even from some yesterday conversations, there was one enthusiastic person who said that he really wants an agentic SOC, and he wants it today, and he would never trust agents with any kind of IAM credentials. And I thought, oh, wait, what? Hold on. You want agentic SOC, but you don't trust the agents with any kind of IAM creds and any kind of access. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, oh, how do you imagine it's going to work? And they didn't. So how do you grow to trust? Like, I trust the machine to summarize the text. Everything's fine. I don't think anybody's having major trust issues with LLM summarizing text or writing some copy of a report or even describing the alert. But when things get to remediation or taking action or roaming freely in your environment, making decisions as agents are supposed to do, how do you get to this trust? And what I'm trying to hint at is that my typical answer to this would be like, well, try it many times. If you see the results which are good, you trust it. But for some of this, you cannot do it many times because you have to trust it to do it many times, and you don't trust it. So any kind of trust, for people with trust issues, like probably us.
Yes, everyone in this room.
Any advice on this?
Yeah, so I'm very glad that you brought this up, because one of the challenges that I've had is, as I think about like how do we evaluate AI capabilities and security tools, there are three things, right? There's the utility of the features themselves, which is pretty self-evident when you start using them. There's how it's priced, what the cost looks like. At this point, we've seen that most are including it in the cost of the offering with some overages charges if you reach a certain point, that type of thing. But there are a variety of ways that you can do pricing, which we could get into. Yeah. And then trust. Trust is the big one. Trust is the one that differentiates. It's the one that is the most important. It is the one that is one of the most difficult to actually validate and understand. But there's a couple of ways that I recommend doing this. There's the ways that you can prepare and make sure that you've done your due diligence from a trust standpoint, and then post due diligence, the actual implementation and how you're using it. On the due diligence side, a lot of that comes back to, if you're either building this in-house or you're evaluating a vendor's capabilities, how are they going about doing testing and validation of the AI agent? We talk so much about the models that are being used and how effective they are. What we don't talk enough about is the harness around the models, because that's where decisions get made as to which model should be used. What is the cost optimization that's happening? What is the testing and validation of the output to make sure that it is correct on a regular basis? Yep. And so if you look at a lot of the vendors, if you really dig into it and ask them a lot of questions, you can get to the point of understanding, are they doing things like, of course, using a golden data set, doing statistical modeling, evaluating the output over many different runs and those types of things. But you can also get to the point of asking, like, okay, from a testing and validation standpoint, do you have someone internally that is reviewing every single response that the LLM gives and saying, is this right or is this wrong? The only ones that are really capable of doing that are the MDR providers, because they've abstracted away from you as the user the output of the LLM, and they're just saying, yes, this is right, or no, this is not correct. The alternative, and honestly, when you ask about testing and validation, the first answer that often comes up for many vendors is they're like, well, we have a little thumbs up, thumbs down button in the corner that the user can press, and they can tell us if it's right or if it's wrong, which for anyone with a software development background, we know that like crowdsourcing QA is an absolute nightmare and disaster scenario. No one wants to do it for good reason. And so if that is the answer, that should be an immediate red flag for you. Yep. There needs to be more to the testing and validation that's going on, and it needs to be continuous, because to your point, like the reality is that the models may be right today, but that can change tomorrow. And that is always going to be the case. This is a continuous cycle of improvement that has to take place to make sure that these models are not only good, but that they're getting better. If you push many of these vendors, they'll also give you metrics. They may give you metrics on how effective the models are, what percentage of the time they're wrong, which can be a little bit misleading, because in some cases they're running so many times that like they might say it's wrong 0.1% of the time, but with the number of runs that they're doing, that's an insane kind of metric to look at. But it'll give you a sense for, do they have any idea of whether this is actually working well or not? So that's on the one side of like the due diligence piece. Yep. On a continuous basis, to your point, unfortunately, a lot of it comes back to that low-hanging fruit of like, what are the lowest risk, highest reward scenarios where we can use it, we can validate the output, and we can build trust over time with that method. That requires choosing a vendor on the due diligence side that is a partner, and that you understand that they get the problem statement here. They get the fact that this is not something that they can just push off to you as a user to do the validation of whether it's right or wrong, and that they're going to be improving this over time and not just relying on Anthropic or Google or whoever's building the model itself, that they're actually putting in work to make sure that it's accurate.
I mean, it would get better next year because the model gets better is kind of a red flag, right? Because like, then why do you exist as a vendor?
Yes.
I think that to me was like a side conversation, another that I had. We have 5 minutes and we have a couple of really fun questions. And one that may be a little bit of my obsession, so I'm kind of using you to sort of allay my fears, and that's the decentralized argument. So occasionally, and again, I may have made fun of this on Twitter at some point, people show up and say, I don't need SIEM, I don't need centralized log storage because I have agents and I can just command my agents to find the data, bring the data, analyze it, and tell me what it means. And it seems like there are many people are tempted by this. Some of them are pushing more for decentralized federated storage, and sometimes it's just pure luck-based storage. The data is either there or not. But what has emerged is that for agents to make the right decisions, the data has to be correct, available, well formatted, and not misleading and complete. So oddly enough, my decentralized versus centralized in light of agents have been slowly but surely shifting to actually agents probably would drive more data centralization. And that is, I realize it's a bit of a contrarian take because people assume that decentralized is going to win, but I don't think it's going to win. And I feel like it's doing a little bit of the opposite. So what's your reaction to this whole conundrum?
Okay, it's such a good question, and you're like the best person to answer this, so I want you to answer it after me too and tell me I'm wrong. But I unfortunately agree. Like, this is one of the problems that I'm having right now is we're seeing, like, in the SIM market especially, there's a huge push to do like a federated data model. And it's been such a dream for so long, like so many years people have wanted to do this. Understandably so, because we live in a multi-cloud world, we live with stuff on-prem, like it's just the reality is data is everywhere, not to quote the keynote from yesterday, but it is a true statement. And so the unfortunate part about that is, to your point, data formatting is important, data quality is important, data normalization is important, and if you want the AI agents to have the context, then they need to have access to that data, and they need to have it consistently and in a way that's easy to use. And the pushback that I get is, well, the AI agent can just go to all of these different data stores and find what they need. Okay, they could. They have to have a lot of information in order to be able to go to all of these different data stores, make those choices, identify what data they need to pull. It is not a simple thing to expect the agent to do. Like, assuming it's a simple thing is basically saying, oh, the agent is magic, and it's just going to be able to do magic, and we're going to be able to get the output that we need.
Some of the data right there from the alternate.
Yeah, from the ether. Yeah,
from ether. That's right.
Exactly. And so I do think that, like, I would love to see an approach with federated data access that actually works at scale and doesn't have the latency constraints that we often see and the issues around, like, data access. Yeah. But I'm struggling because we're still not seeing that be a reality. The technical constraints are very difficult here for this problem. So, but I'm curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's that I think, like, people haven't tried it enough with the kind of federated / luck-based approach. But I feel like hybrid would win. I don't want to pay for petabytes of data sometimes.
Yes.
So there would probably be a hybrid, but it's a central core being very important kind of hybrid and not equal partners kind of hybrid. So
yes.
that's my kind of all of the above answer. We have 2 minutes, and we have this final question about humans.
Yes.
And I kind of want to formulate it as it's 2030, you find the client SOC, you open the door, and you see humans in there. What do they do? What do humans do in 2030 SOC?
Oh God, that's so much closer than I think it is, 'cause it's only 4 years away.
Yes, that was the shocking reaction we get. Yes, yeah. Somebody said, well, why are we talking about 2030s? And he's like, it's 3 years, dude.
Yeah, it's so soon. I do think that we are, based off of what I'm seeing with some of the more bleeding edge use cases here, we're going to see a human in the loop as at the kind of like final decision-making focus, and potentially like more focused, continually focused on response. But certainly when we look at like the security operations function, it's going to be a tandem process with these agents. It is already in some circumstances. Now, it doesn't change the importance of the analyst because they're still the ones making the decision, but it does change their role and their focus and the information that they need to have access to and the way that they think about making the decisions that they're making. Like, they still need the skills of the security analyst, which is what makes this so difficult, because we have this juxtaposition of, well, technology is going to take over a lot of these tasks, which has been fine in the past with deterministic systems, but we don't live in that world anymore. The analyst still needs to be there to be able to make the decisions. And so I do think that there's a level of like partner programming, kind of tandem work that has to be done with the agents themselves, while also making sure that you're still building the skills of the security analyst certainly like on a defensive standpoint, but on an offensive standpoint too, so that they have the best balance of information to be able to identify that's not quite right. A lot of that comes back to like second order thinking and ensuring that the analyst is asking the first question and the second question that comes out of that, which I think is a gap in a lot of thinking around AI, and where we end up with a lot of these instances where AI gives you the wrong answer and you just trust it because you're not asking the second question of, is this actually right? How can I identify if this is actually right or if this is actually based on something real? But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I agree with much of that, because the typical broad answer is like they would define guardrails is a little stressful, because ultimately you need to know a lot to define guardrails, so it's not a very junior job. I feel like there would always be the narrow edge case when AI, well, not always, nobody knows about always, but like in the short to medium term future, we will have this either 1% or 0.01% or whatever small percentage of cases when AI is honestly stumbled. And somebody with kind of more of a gut experience on this may be needed. I don't have the data to back this up, but I mean, we do have examples of really highly automated, highly AI-powered teams finding things that are sort of in the unknown territory, where humans get summoned to the site to figure it out. So, but I mean, the guardrails argument is there, the dealing with edge cases there, defining what AI would do, all the risk assessment stuff just comes up as well. So this is like deciding what actually matters to you, maybe based on some tribal knowledge and formal criteria is all there. But I feel like this is an area for work, together or separately, it's a separate story, but we should probably work on this a lot more, because people are asking about this, and in some minds, they kind of assume that they won't be a role for humans, and I think we frankly both disagree with that.
Oh, so we have our yearly conference, Forrester does, and we have like our keynotes, and then our top user clients come and ask questions of the keynoters. And in that session last year, every single question was about talent management with AI and like how to actually prepare talent. Every single one. This was a 30-minute grilling session for us, and it was unbelievable. So yes, I think it's like the biggest priority, or should be.
What would humans do? Perfect. We definitely run over, so very much appreciate the attention.